Hello and welcome back to MTS. In this video, we are going to cover permissions, how to change permissions and ownerships of files and directories using the chgrp, change group command, chmod, change mode command, and chown, change ownership command. Before we begin with the command, let's take a look at a file and directory's permissions to understand how to view and read their permissions. The permissions for files and directory are listed on the left. Reading from left to right, if the first letter in the permissions is a D, that represents a directory. If the first position on the left is a line like we see here, that represents a file. So reading from left to right, D stands for directory, line stands for a file. The next three positions represents the permission for the owner of this file or directory. Read, the R stands for read, the W stands for write, and the X stands for execute. The following three positions represents the permissions for the group, and the last three positions represents the permissions for everyone else that has access to the server. After the permissions, the owner of the file or directory is listed here, and the group that have access to the file or directory is listed here. Now that we have a basic understanding of permission and file ownership, let's see how we can make changes to the ownerships and permissions to either a file and or directory. In these examples, I am going to use the root user or an admin user to execute the commands to make permission changes. So let's navigate inside a directory name and new directory. Inside this directory, we have two directories. Let's create a file. Now that we have a file in the mix, let's start with the chgrp command, which stands for change group. As we can see, the group listed here is the root group, which means any user that has root as one of their groups have access to these files and directories. To change the group of a file or directory, the command is chgrp, chgroup, the group that you would like to change, to. In this case, the name of the group is going to be student, name of the file and or directory that you would like to change. In this case, we're going to change new file. If we take a look, we see that root owns the file. Anyone in the student group has access to the file, but based on the group permissions here, the group members can only read the file. They cannot write or execute the file. Which brings us to our next command. Let's clear the screen. The next command we want to cover is the change mode command or the chmod command. The chmod command changes the permissions of a file or directory, which can change the read, write, or execute permissions for a group, the owner, or other members that have access to the server. So to add the write permission to the group of the new file.txt file, the command will be chmod, and we are going to use G to represent group, plus we want to issue the write permission. Then we list the file that we want to change the permission on, new file.txt. We take a look, the group now has write permission also on the file. There is more than one way to change the permissions on a file or directory. In our last example, we used the letter representation of the permission that we wanted to change to. You can also use the numerics to change the permissions of a file or directory. The numerics for the permissions are read equals 4, write equals 2, and execute equals 1. The full permissions for any entity of a file or directory in Linux is 7. So currently, the permissions on the new file.txt file with number representation is the owner has 6, the group has 6, and others have 4. So if we're going to change the permissions to give other members on the server read, write, and execute permissions for the new file.txt file using a number representation, we will use the same command, change mode, and since we're only changing the other permissions, we will input the number representation that is currently present for the file. In this case, is 6 for owner, 6 for group. For others, we want to give others the ability to read, write, and execute. So we'll just use the number 7, and we will add that to the new file.txt. If you take a look at the permissions on that file, you would see that the last 3 positions for permissions on the new file.txt are RWX, full permissions, read, write, and execute. We can also use the same number representation to remove all permissions for others on the same file. To do so, the command will be chmod. We would keep the same permissions for the owner, the group, 6 and 6, which means read and write, and we will put a 0 for others, and then we will list the file that we want to change. Now only the owner and members of the student group has read-write access to this file. To change the owner of a file or directory, we would use the chown change ownership command. To change the owner from root to student of the new file.txt file, the command will be chown. The name of the owner that you would like to give ownership to, in this case student, and the name of the file, new file.txt. Take a look at permissions on the file. We will see student is now the owner and the group owner of the file. You can also change the owner of a directory using the same command. One thing we must consider, if we take a look inside of the fall directory, there's nothing in here. So let's create a few files in this fall directory. As we can see, the new files are created in the fall directory and they are owned by root, and the group ownership is also root. If we were to change the ownership of the fall directory using the previous command, chown, and the student name, the student user on the same fall directory, we can see that it changed the owner of the directory to student. But if we take a look inside of the fall directory, the files are still owned by root. And we're going to change the ownership back to root on the fall directory. And we will still see that everything is owned by root. If we want to make the ownership change recursive on a directory, which means the change go into the directory into other subdirectories, we have to pass the R argument, which represents recursive. And again, to view a list of possible arguments you can use with the command, you can use a -- help argument on the command. Right here, the capital R argument shows that the recursive option will operate on files and directories recursively, which means inside of the directory. So if we rerun the command from earlier, the change ownership command, adding the capital R argument, the same student user on the same directory, and we were to do a listing, we will see that student does own the fall directory. And if we conduct a listing of inside a file directory, student also owns the file within that directory. So the same rules apply to the change group command. If we add the help argument and we see the capital R also operates on files and directories recursively. So as we see, the fall directory, the group owner is root, and inside of the fall directory, all files are group owned by root. So if we executed the change group command with the student owner to give the student group ownership on the fall directory, we take a look at the fall directory, the student group is the group owner of the fall directory, but the files inside are still owned by root, are still group owned by root. By passing the capital R command, By passing the capital R argument to the chgrp command for the student group on the same directory, that will change the group ownership of all files and directories within the fall directory. So those are the basics of using the permissions commands to change permissions and ownership to files and directory within the Linux operating system. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.